Let's take a look at the reading 26 study questions from Ortega y Gasset's The Revolt of the Masses, 1930. Number one, what is the cause of the crisis that Ortega is claiming Europe is undergoing? Do you agree that this actually constitutes a crisis? Why or why not? The crisis is the ascension of the masses to complete social power in Europe, um, both politically and I think especially culturally. That is mass culture. The masses have basically taken over Europe. Why is that a crisis? I think that his reason is what he says in the beginning is that the masses who cannot direct their own personal existence are now directing the state, the culture. And that's the crisis. Very, very contentious thing to say, but seen from his point of view, people who are utterly unqualified, even as he says, to lead their own personal existence, are now in charge of everything. That, in his mind, I think, is the crisis. Number two, Ortega points out that everything's full. Towns are full of people, houses full of tenants, hotels full of guests, trains full of travelers, cafes full of customers, parks full of promenaders, consulting rooms of famous doctors full of patients, theaters full of spectators, and beaches full of bathers. Why does he see this as a kind of a problem? Well, it's not just because everything's crowded and it may be hard to get a ticket at the theater or a place, a table at a restaurant, but it's a sign of something that the masses have come out of their shell. One of his points is that these sort of places, especially theaters, art galleries, resort hotels, these were built for the bourgeoisie. I don't think he uses that term, but these were built for. These places were made for the so-called qualified minorities that he refers to later. The common people didn't go to these places in the old days, and the old days is before World War One, I believe. He's writing in 1930. Something has changed, and now everybody goes, and this is a sign, right? If everything's full of people, where did these people come from? Well, they were always there, but they kept to their little village or they kept to their particular neighborhood in the city, and now they're showing that they're in control. Again, very contentious thing to say. That's why it's a problem because it is a sign of the revolt of the masses. Number three, what does Ortega mean when he writes, there are no longer protagonists, there is only the chorus? Well, the protagonist is the hero of the Greek drama, the Antigone, the Oedipus, the Medea, whereas the chorus is the background of the people. Now, he says, in European culture, the protagonists have disappeared. There are no heroic individuals, there's just the mass of people. Number four, Ortega claims that in the presence of one individual, we can decide whether he is mass or not. How so? How does he think the mass person is defined? I would say his notion of the mass person is the person who has no hopes for themselves, in the sense that they're not aware of their own shortcomings. He describes possibility of a man who, upon reflection on his own character and capabilities, realizes that he's mediocre, realizes that he's limited, and realizes that he probably won't do anything very important with his life. He says that person is not mass because they have a consciousness of their limitations. The mass person is a person who has no consciousness of their limitations, who feels no need to become anything other than what they already are, who has no aspirations. Number five, Ortega says that cultural and political leadership used to be done by qualified minorities. He is appalled that the masses no longer are led by them. Is he right? Why or why not? Well, who are the qualified minorities? They're the people with education or some sort of background or capabilities that gave them legitimacy to be leaders of society. And qualified minorities, I think, people who know how legislation is made and know history, people who have a professional skill, like being a doctor or a lawyer, people like religious authorities who have background in theology, religious thought. Um, it's not so much that There aren't specialists anymore. There are no longer people who are truly educated who are in control. And yes, Ortega is appalled that the masses are no longer led by them. Is he right? Why? Well, he's appalled because I don't know. I mean, again, I'm not saying I agree with all this. I'm just offering it to you for your consideration. Um, that is, it's not that there should be social classes, the social organism of Tawny. It's rather that the people that there's something called qualifications. Let's say in academics, a philosophy teacher should be somebody who really knows philosophy and not somebody who has a superficial grasp of it. A political leader is someone who should know history and the nature of the country and the history of certain ideals, and not someone who's ignorant of that. I think that's the kind of thing he's talking about. Whether he's right or not, I don't know. Number six, what is the difference between the old form of democracy and what Ortega calls hyperdemocracy? The old form of democracy was where the masses kind of recognized that they didn't have the qualifications to assume leadership positions. So they trusted in a qualified minority to do that. That is, let's say we're all citizens. We all have the same rights. We all have protection, equal protection under the law. But we recognize that some people, through, not that it's just, but some people have a particularly good grasp of history, of politics, of legislation, of culture. And maybe we should let them trust them, not absolutely in any sort of totalitarian sense, but maybe we should trust them to make the big decisions. Whereas in hyperdemocracy, no, that's the rule of what he would call the masses, direct rule of the masses. And again, he sees it as a crisis because he believes that the masses are not qualified to rule. Very contentious thing to say. Number seven, the excerpt ends with Ortega claiming the mass crushes beneath it everything that is different, everything that is excellent, individual, qualified, and select. Anybody who is not like everybody, who does not think like everybody, runs the risk of being eliminated. Do you agree? Why or why not? Boy, that's a tough question. I think we've all struggled in our lives, especially as children and young adults, with the problems of whether or not we fit in, and struggled with our own individuality as opposed to what it seems to us is demanded we need to do to conform and be accepted by our peers. I think that his point here is very similar to what Oscar Wilde was saying, that we have a culture that discourages individualism in all sorts of ways. And if individualism is the point of life, being a true individual, and we do have a society, in fact, I don't know if we do, but if we do have a society that discourages that, that would be kind of tragic, wouldn't it?